us more about eugenics in Europe and the eugenic sterilization process, probably during the interwar period?
Certainly. Eugenics emerged at the end of the 19th century in Britain and Germany and America, but it was formulated in its modern interpretation by Francis Galton, an English scientist. He was Charles Darwin's cousin, and he offered various interpretations of eugenics in the 1870s and 1880s. And then in 1883, he gave the definition that we now use. Eugenics is a science that deals with the improvement and development of the racial qualities of an individual, or as he put it, the innate qualities of a race. And then from Britain, eugenics traveled fast and wide. He went to America, he went to Germany, he went to other parts of the world. And it really became a global phenomenon by 1912, when the first Eugenic Congress was held in London. And then by 1921, when the second International Congress of Eugenics was organized in New York at the Museum of Natural History, American Museum of Natural History, it truly expressed a very wide range of opinions. Now, early on, by 1890s, sterilization was used in America to penalize and punish criminals. It was used as a method of treatment, vasectomy in particular. Vasectomy was applied, and we have this case of what it was called at the time the first eugenic sterilizer, a physician, Harry Sharp, at Jeffersonville in Indiana. And he used vasectomy to sterilize criminals. And he published on the topic, advocating sterilization as a possible method, a punitive method. By 1907, Indiana is the first state in the world to introduce a eugenic law. So you have already people very keen to apply theories of heredity, and heredity used in this way meant basically the control of reproduction of certain people. They didn't like criminals, they didn't like women, they considered to be feeble-minded and hence inferior. They didn't like people of color. So this was clearly both sexist and racist. And they used sterilization to target these groups of people from categories of people defined medically as having a problem, to social categories such as prostitutes, for example. So that's early on, 1907, you have a sterilization law in America. Then sterilization becomes very popular, both coerced of forced sterilization and voluntary sterilization. They always use these two venues of approaching sterilization. Ideally, the state will apply a sterilization law and forcefully sterilize people, as it happened in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, or will convince people of the benefits of sterilization, so they voluntarily put themselves forward to sterilization. There was a big debate in Britain and in Germany in the 1920s, as well as in countries such as Romania or Greece or Bulgaria or Poland, about the benefits of voluntary sterilization. Physicians in these countries were very keen to explain to the population in articles in newspapers, to explain to their colleagues in articles in scientific journals and books, the benefits of voluntary sterilization in dealing with the population, which was seen increasingly deteriorating biologically and socially. But laws were not introduced until late. The first law introduced in Europe is in Switzerland in 1928. Switzerland, the canton, one of the cantons in Switzerland, Canton de Vaud, introduced sterilization in 1928. So it was in Switzerland one of the most democratic places you can think of in Europe in the 1920s, which promoted eugenic sterilization. Then he moved very quickly to the Scandinavian countries, again, always used as symbols of liberal democracies and tolerant societies. Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, all introduced sterilization laws in the 1930s. And then, of course, 1933, Nazi Germany, which is the most horrific and the most tragic example of how eugenics was used for political purposes, and also how sterilization was applied to wide categories of people identified genetically as unworthy of living and identified racially and socially as unnecessary or undesired. So everyone who was, for example, of African descent, Afro-German, was sterilized. Everyone who was considered to be asocial or criminal was sterilized. Everyone who was an alcoholic, chronic alcoholic, was sterilized, or almost everyone who was an alcoholic could have been sterilized, and so on and so forth. So the Nazi Germany is the first state that literally recreates the internal fabric of society according to eugenic and biopolitical principles. Other countries debated extensively the introduction of sterilization laws across Europe. There is absolutely no country I can think of which did not discuss the possibility of applying sterilization, whether we're thinking of Catholic countries such as Spain or Portugal, we're thinking of Protestant countries such as Scandinavian countries, we're thinking of Greek Orthodox countries such as Greece, Bulgaria, or Romania. They all debated and wanted to introduce sterilization laws in the 1930s. They didn't for many reasons, including, of course, very strong religion oppositions, particularly in Catholic countries to sterilization. And in some ways, the internal dynamic and the social structure of countries such as Romania or Greece, for example, which were only at the point in their history where a number of things were happening at the same time with the introduction of eugenics and biopolitics as a national philosophy of life. In the Romanian case, as you know probably very well, this coincided with the creation of the greater Romanian state. So they had to do so many things at the same time that many of their ambitions had to be put aside. So they were very keen in 1920s to transform Romania into a proper biopolitical and eugenic state, as any modern state wants to be. And they looked at other examples such as Germany or America or Britain or Italy. And from these countries, they imported not only ideas of culture and social progress and institutional development, but equally ideas of how eugenics can help form and model a perfect society. But they simply run out of time in many ways. And then you have the Second World War, the Holocaust, and the horrors associated with the Holocaust. And the whole thing had to be reconfigured. Interestingly, of course, we know that sterilization was one of the methods used by communist countries. So eugenics is being reinvented under 1945 in Eastern Europe. It continues to inform the entire construction, not only of the ideological tenets of the new man and the new woman, so the new communist society, multilaterally developed. I think that was all developed in all possibilities. I think that's why the new language used this expression. But also they were not shy of applying particularly sterilization to various categories of people they deemed to be ineffectual, unable to integrate into the new socialist society. And they were deemed to be criminals and asocials, and whose fertility was seen as a threat to the majority of the population. And this was the Roma people. So Roma women were sterilized in Czechoslovakia in the 1970s and 80s, similar to how Black women were sterilized in America in the 1970s and 80s, or how indigenous women were sterilized in Peru in 1990s. So to have this sensation that one, eugenics stopped in 1945 is wrong. To have this second misconception that eugenics only developed in Western Europe or outside Europe is wrong. Thirdly, to assume that communism did not allow eugenic ideas to continue to survive and thrive is wrong. And we need to bring that conversation together in a way that allows the nuances to be explained and expressed, but also it allows people to come to terms with this very complicated and to many people unknown history of eugenics.
Did the eugenists see themselves as men of vision, as saviors of the nation?
Absolutely, this is how they started. They depicted themselves as the guardians of the race, as the gatekeepers of the human garden. They wanted to weed off unwanted elements. So we have these powerful metaphors of the eugenicist as a gardener weeding out unfit people, as you would weed out plants you don't want in your garden to create the perfect, idealized version of society. And also they believed to be people of vision. Of course, they were talking about the future and how the future should look like and what they can, and how they can bring that realization of the future about. And they believed that, of course, the knowledge of heredity and science in general is the new pedestal onto which you could base a future society. If in the past it was religion, with the development of natural and human sciences in the 19th century, it was believed that finally the moment had come for a new vision of humanity, one based on rationalism, based on materialism, based on evolution, based on knowledge of heredity. So eugenicists argued they can not just provide a vision of the future, and many of them wrote quite amazing utopian novels and plans about the future. If you think of Aldous Huxley book about Brave New Worlds, if you think of Haldane's book on Prometheus, and of course even Francis Galton, the founder of modern eugenics, wrote a utopian novel, Can't Say Where, in which he imagined a future where you'll have selective breeding and a society organized according to eugenic principles, very much in a way going back to Plato's utopianism and Plato's ideas that he put in the Republic about, selective breeding should be one of the principles of the state. So there were always visionaries and men of vision and women of vision. You shouldn't really think the majority of them, of course, were men, but there were very important female eugenicists as well. So they did believe that science would replace religion as the new foundation of society, and medicine can provide a modern understanding of health and the human body and disease. Genetics can provide an understanding of how we come about and define what we are organically and biologically. Sociology and anthropology can finally explain how societies work and how people are, bound together. But all of that, of course, fall apart when ideas of race and human differentiation became more important to most of them. So they were less interesting in bringing people together than keeping them apart. So what eugenics did and what racism did was not creating an ideal society work for all of us, but an ideal society for some of us. And most of us were white and able and educated and so on and so forth. So these were the visions they had about a future world in which all of them would be of a certain belonging to a certain group, which of course excluded all the other groups who were different and which were coming from a completely different background, social and racial and sexual